Hello, everyone, and welcome to this talk with artist Brid Murphy, which is being presented by the Glucksman in collaboration with the National Sculpture Factory as part of the project Graft, which is an off-site presentation of commissioned artworks that respond to Cork City Centre, and I suppose was developed by ourselves and our colleagues in the National Sculpture Factory as a way to allow artists to have a thoughtful and engaged response with Cork City, and also particularly, I suppose, to ensure that something could go ahead even if COVID restrictions had required, as they did this year, for us to close the gallery. We were absolutely thrilled that the artists that we selected all accepted our invitation. And over this number of weeks while Graft is on, we have been doing conversations with the artists, and it's my great privilege to welcome and to have today's chat with Brid. Brid is an artist who hails from Portarlington in Laois, and through the wonders of Zoom, we're able to connect with her directly today. She works in a wide variety of media, such as video, projection mapping, sound, photography, performance and drawing, and we're going to look at that a little bit today. She graduated from the Limerick School of Art and Design with a BA in sculpture and combined media, and as we'll see as we discuss some of the artworks that she's made in recent years, her practice explores themes such as gender, anxiety and self-identity through different kind of, I suppose, forms of engagement, both in terms of the exhibition format and in offsite work such as that she's done with Graft. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing about Brid is that she only graduated in 2019. And given that COVID kind of kicked off in 2020, it is absolutely stunning that she has managed to put together a really cohesive body of work in that time. And I thought that it might be kind of interesting for us to kind of go back, Brid, and look a little bit at that early work so that people can kind of see just kind of how the work for Graft has been developed. So you're very welcome. It's wonderful to have you with us. And maybe we can start by looking at one of those first early works after Francesca.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. I'm just going to start sharing a little presentation here, just of a few different works. So the first one here is called After Francesca. So it's after Francesca Woodman, who would have been like a very big influence. So this piece is a 30-minute video loop. So it was projection mapped onto an alcove in the Sailors' Home in Limerick. So just about the work, so it was projection mapped. I initially took a photograph of this alcove, and I projection mapped the bricks onto itself, just so it kind of illuminated the background. And then onto this, I projection mapped a video piece of a woman. So at the start of the video, she's just fully visible, but then throughout the video, she takes this chalice, in which she then takes a substance from the chalice and like wipes away her body. You can see here in the photo, she's like a semi kind of like molding into the wall behind her, and then by the end of the piece she has just become completely invisible, as she's just kind of morphed into the wall. So I think it's inspired a lot by like Francesca Woodman's like photography, where she would she'd use the body to almost become one with the architecture. And then this was also made around the time of repeal, where we were talking about women's like body autonomy, and how kind of church and state have taken it, did take it away from women. So
No, it's really interesting, Brid, because I think, you see some of these themes that recur then elsewhere in your work. And I suppose one of those is very much that kind of picking up on ideas of both recent and kind of more faraway works in art history, which of course is something that Francesca Woodman herself did in terms of evoking ideas of the ascension in her work. And you can really see that here. But the other thing that I think strikes us immediately is the kind of theatricality of the work. And I think that you yourself mentioned that there was a kind of an acknowledgement of the work of Samuel Beckett in relation to this work too.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think a lot of my works, especially the work I'll talk about next, is really inspired by Beckett. Just the theatre of it all. Yeah.
Because it has that kind of sense of being kind of really kind of almost pulling us into a stage set here. And that's very interesting, I think, in the context of also the kind of social activism, which is another very kind of strong kind of theme in your work. And, you know, I think sometimes when we think about socially engaged practice, we don't necessarily think about it being as kind of fluent with new technologies, or even, I suppose, as referential to art history as your work is. So it's kind of fascinating to see that here. And maybe it might be interesting to move on to the next work, Brid, which is a very, I think, important work, actually. And you might speak a little bit about how this came about, so that our viewers here can learn about the commission itself.
Yeah, so this piece was in collaboration with Darren Collins. So the National Museum of Ireland, the Museum and Country Life in Mayo, they commissioned 3 artists who were current and previous students in LIT to create 3 different artworks in response to the kind of Traveller's Journey exhibition that they had touring. So myself, Lou Wallace and Gianna Tommaso were the 3 artists commissioned, and we all took kind of like different avenues to explore the theme. So I was looking at multiple minority identities, so like the trouble with sometimes identifying as both like a traveller and like a member of the LGBT community. So this work started, I knew Darren Collins through a friend of a friend. He is like a traveller activist, like for the LGBT community. He's very involved in kind of speaking out and kind of supporting other young travellers in coming out. And he's also an advocate for like speaking out about mental health. So over a few months, the 2 of us collaborated. We met up. He came down to LSAD a good few times, and first we made this kind of life-size video portrait. So it's just a video of him standing in the space. So he's projected life size here. So once you come into the museum space, you're standing like face to face with this full height man. And then he transcribed his story and like what his own experience of what it's like to be a gay traveller man. And that is kind of superimposed and plays along his t-shirt. And then this is also accompanied by a video piece. It's basically an 8-minute video of Darren telling his like life story of how he kind of came to terms with like kind of discovering his sexuality. He was engaged to be married at like 16 and kind of ran away with a girl, and then kind of coming to that, to discovering that he was actually gay. And then he discusses like his own struggles with his mental health and how he actually had multiple suicide attempts. But then he decided to share the story to like encourage other young people and especially other young travelers that there is like kind of hope at the end of the tunnel. There is light. And he kind of made this piece just to get his voice out there and like let other young traveller people know that it's okay to identify as a traveller and a member of the LGBT community. Yeah, this is it's a long video, so I couldn't play it, so this is just a little snippet. But yeah, this was just on a screen right beside this, so you would hear the voice of Darren while standing like straight in front of him in the space.
And already you can see in both of these works this kind of sense in which you're creating the conditions for the viewer to really encounter someone through film. Like we're not being put outside it. We're really being asked to, I suppose, engage with the work, and that does feel important in the context of the kinds of themes that you're taking on, as you mentioned. The kind of reference to repeal and the whole context for the Francesca work, and now here in terms of just not just mental health and issues of suicide ideation, but also very specifically in the context of kind of the LGBT community and the traveler community, where that really has a huge impact. But there's also that really kind of strong sense, though, of giving representation to these people in a way that we're not maybe as used to seeing these full-size images or hearing these stories in somewhere like the National Museum. And I think that's kind of very interesting. Is that a very kind of deliberate move on your part, Brid?
Yeah, definitely, and especially like having the two kind of like video pieces side by side, because obviously there's the disembodied mouth, so I think that kind of like draws in focus to his words and his own experience. But then I thought it was also very important to have this life-size like image or video of him just standing there to kind of like just so it wasn't this disembodied person, that you can kind of fully stand there in front of him and experience and listen to the words he's speaking. But this was a very collaborative piece as well. It was all like it came from most of it came from Darren and what he wanted to say and how he wanted to be perceived. And I think that was kind of the thing that was most important to me, that Darren got across what he wanted to say.
It's a phenomenal work. And again, I love that kind of echo of something like Beckett's mouth we spoke
Yeah,
about, like that not I,
yeah, no, I.
like a really strong reference here. And that's kind of, again, something, that's a mid 20th century. Like, I mean, kind of like, I think that film was 1972. So you're kind of looking at that. And at the same time, going back in art history. And if we look at the next work, you made a very brave proposal to the Zurich Portrait Prize. And I know, and I should say this because I was a judge this year, and I remember the very lively conversations that were had around the inclusion of a video work. I mean, just even to kind of propose a video work was a kind of a very courageous move, but not least, again, because here you find yourself looking at ideas of gender fluidity and kind of who and what, again, might be represented within the National Collection. Would you speak a little bit about that, Brid?
Yeah, so this piece kind of came about as to reference, like if you go back to the Renaissance, like issues like gender identity and sexuality, like they were issues then. They were like maybe even more accepted sometimes than today. So it was kind of like drawing on art history, and like the likes of like Michelangelo or Da Vinci, like they all reference this gender and sexuality in their work. But so I feel like it's a contemporary take on that, but also like there is a lot of like historical reference there. So like even like both both performers in this piece. So there's like Isolde Donoghue, she's an amazing performance artist, and Day McGee. So are the two people here, and like they both like don't conform to like kind of these specific gender binaries. So they kind of perform in this kind of space. So it kind of references the traditional triptych that you see like in a lot of kind of Renaissance or Baroque art. And then like the color blue here was like also a really important decision, or like so blue like throughout history was often seen as like a very like feminine color, like it was derived from like lapis lazuli, and it was like kind of kept as the sacred like pigment that would usually be reserved for like the likes of the Madonna, just this like beautiful feminine color. But then we come up to like the 20th century, where they have this like notion that like blue is for boys and like pink is for girls. So it was kind of like playing on that kind of idea of like color and Yeah, and then there's also kind of reference to kind of Michelangelo's frescoes in the Sistine Chapel. So there was these kind of like seemingly floating bodies on the ceiling. I also like I wanted to reference that, and then also obviously the nudity here is like they're wearing underwear. So in the Sistine Chapel, the Pope actually censored the bodies, and they painted their little fig leaves over it. So I thought that was also an important thing, just kind of it was open, but then there's also the shame around like gender and sexuality. So that kind of yeah plays back into that as well.
Yeah, it's a really wonderful work, and I love that about how it kind of recalls back that kind of those Renaissance conventions of painting in terms of the kind of predella panels that used to sit under the main altar, where often the artist had kind of a little bit more freedom to explore kind of ideas. And then, as you say, pulling it into the Baroque, where you kind of think about this extraordinary drapery and even
Yeah.
the lighting, Brid, that you've used. And I think you might have an image to share with us of it
Oh,
in situ, because of course
yeah.
it was selected and shortlisted for the prize and then brought into the National Gallery, where to me it felt completely at ease with those surroundings. And I think that's because of that incredible sense of rooting it within those art historical conventions, and then, as you say, almost turning them on their head to raise questions about things like who or what gets to be depicted when, but also that beautiful transposition of the color blue itself, and not just, I suppose, in terms of the color, but in terms of blue and feeling blue, and those kinds of, I suppose, associations that we have with the term. And
Yeah.
yet blue is the color of the sky and is often kind of that sense of hope, and that kind of wrestling that happening between the bodies almost sometimes feels like as if they're trying to wrest those meanings as well. It's
Yeah, and I think even like applying for the portrait prize, I was a bit like apprehensive because it being like a video piece, and obviously the Zero Portrait Prize is generally kind of more traditional, like with paintings and photography. But then I feel like this video piece is, it's almost like it is like just a kind of a video painting, kind of just like painting with the lens rather than something that is completely new. I feel like, and even the presentation, I think it's just like a moving painting.
mm. No, and I think as well, in the context of the Portrait Prize, there were some really interesting discussions around, what is a portrait? And we think often as a portrait about being of a specific individual, but of course you could have a portrait of a moment in time or of a society. And I suppose specifically when you get into questions around trans identities or non-binary identities, it is very hard to focus on a specific individual,
Yeah.
precisely because of that sense of wanting to convey the spectrum and that movement. And so one of the things that I think, really resonated with us in terms of selecting the work was the way in which it was a portrait, but with all the ambiguities that were required to bring in that specific conversation around non-binary identities into the Portrait Prize itself and into the heart of the National Gallery, as you can see here. And fantastically, of course, it went on to tour, and hopefully many people got to see it. It was a stunning work, and I suppose for you, one of the kind of first chances really to share your work with a much wider audience. But you did get a residency. I think it might just be nice to touch on that as well. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, so like straight after graduating, then I went on and I obviously had the Zurich Portrait Prize exhibition, which is amazing. But then I also got the opportunity to um, have the graduate residency award in the National Sculpture Factory. So they give me a studio for a good few months, maybe a bit longer than I should have. But throughout that time, I just moved to Cork. So I was renting a space, renting like a room in a house. And I was kind of thinking of these ideas of like, oh, um, like rent and the crazy prices we pay, and the kind of lack of suitable affordable like housing. So then I created this piece. So it's just made of OSB, kind of like just a construction material. And then on top there's like a kind of frosted glass ceiling of these kind of like semi-detached houses. So there's actually there's two of these prisms kind of like back to back, and on each of them there is like a projection mapped like body kind of like confines this very small space. So they are back to back, but they're kind of isolated as well. Just kind of talking about like, yeah, the rents we pay, the inadequate housing, how people are like confined to like smaller spaces. But then I made this just in the time like maybe early 2020, so like
That's
just
what I was going to ask. It feels like one
yeah,
of those kind of terrifyingly prescient moments of
yeah,
artists' vision.
yeah.
Because while it's certainly, and we'll look at that in the work you did for Graft in terms of kind of directly addressing the housing crisis, I mean, it also just seems to so prefigure the very sudden shift that happened. I mean, not just in Ireland, but all over the world, where we were all kind of semi-detached from
Yeah.
from each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it very strange, like looking back at the work, even just like after like in the first lockdown, just kind of reevaluating my time in the sculpture factory and the residency, and kind of looking back at this piece, and thinking like, whoa, it's as if I made this during the lockdown. So that was kind of a strange feeling, but yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that's always so interesting to us, is to see how, in a way, artists are sometimes kind of plugged in and thinking about things, and then it kind of materializes, and you kind of wonder how it comes to sum up for
Yeah.
me. Like, I mean, in quite a brutal way, at that forced sense of isolation that we were put into. But as you said yourself, of course, it come out of this very direct sense that you had of wanting to engage with something, which actually, as we emerge from COVID, is very much coming back into view again. And I know when we were planning Graft, and with our colleagues in the National Sculpture Factory, there was a kind of a sense of wanting to ensure and invite in artists that would look at kind of not just the city as a kind of a playful open space, but as the city as something that is constructing and creating meaning around some of these issues. And so maybe we'll look at the works that you developed for Graft. And I suppose, just to give a bit of context for anyone who isn't aware of how Graft kind of came to be, it was a complete kind of freedom for the artists to come up and propose something, with the caveat that it had to be in the city, that it had to be outdoors, because we wanted to ensure that people were going to be able to encounter the works. And it was a new commission. So kind of, I suppose, in a very exciting way, it was about providing the opportunity for artists to develop new work. And I suppose for ourselves in the Glucksman, that was particularly, the kind of fantastic set of resources that were brought in by our colleagues in the National Sculpture Factory, who, Brid, obviously you'd had the residency there, so you knew when it was there that they provide incredible services to artists. So we were able to support artists to make work for Graft, and then obviously to kind of have it out in the city. And of course, you weren't going to be a bit ambitious about this at all. No. You just are going to go off and make, how many films was it, and take on a whole building and do this. So tell us, maybe go back and say, it would be good to talk through the process, because we're looking here at the final work, which is on Oliver Plunkett Street, and which is being shown currently until the 31st of October. But maybe you can take a step back and just have a kind of talk people through about the kind of brief and how you might have responded to that brief.
Yeah, so when I first got the commission, it was basically like we were in kind of like heights of lockdown. We were all kind of like just in our space. So I spent a lot of time, like I'm currently in Dublin, so I spent a lot of time just kind of like walking around the city. I had friends like looking to like try and find a room, and it was just like there was nowhere available. But then you'd walk around the city and there would just be dereliction after derelict building, places crumbling, like kind of people hoarding all these vacant buildings. So that kind of like upset me. And then you can see the prices of rent increasing, paying like over €1,000 for like a little small bedroom. It just like it really it was upsetting, and just to see like friends and everybody going through that. So I decided fairly early on that I wanted to kind of make a commentary of like the ongoing like housing crisis and how it's affecting young, not just young people, but like a lot of people at the minute. And especially like I had friends who were like living in these kind of apartments that had like maybe 10 other people in them. I actually had a friend who was living in apartment with 40 other people at one stage. Yeah.
Wow.
So like just she was living there for a few weeks because she literally couldn't find anywhere else. And there's spaces like this, and especially with COVID, I know people living with like so many people sharing rooms. I just like, it's okay, so it affects your mental health, but then the pandemic also like makes you realize it really affects your physical health. Like with COVID, it's just it's dangerous. So I really wanted to talk about that. So then I kind of came down for a few like site visits or to walk around Cork. It was lovely to actually go down to Cork again, because with the pandemic I had left after being living there and hadn't been back. So it was lovely to go down and just see how things like changed. And then obviously there's a lot of dereliction in Cork as well. So I kind of just started looking at these buildings, and especially like above shop fronts, kind of places that could possibly be apartments. So then I found this building on Oliver Plunkett Street, and then Here's Health kindly kind of gave it to me to use for a few months before they're renovating it for a cafe and health shop, which is really nice to see. But yeah, so I decided that I wanted to just basically show what this could be, or like it could possibly be a place to house people, but it's also, I just wanted to show how people are confined in these spaces, and how young people, like the basically all compressed into these small spaces. But if everywhere was if we had a few more kind of renovated spaces, or like more availability, then this wouldn't be such an issue. But yeah, so I decided to film friends as much as possible. So in like their kind of bubbles, or like people who live together. So I kind of turned my parents' garage and leash into a mini photo studio. Yeah, so over a few weeks I had different kind of groups of friends who like mainly live together come to like be together in this space and represent like a window. And yeah, so then the final installation, so they're just basically projection mapped onto the windows. I got this like a really cool film that you can attach to windows that basically allows you to use the windows as a projection screen. So then as you can just like walk down Oliver Plunkett Street, and you can kind of just encounter this piece. You don't have to go into a gallery, and I think it like I think like anybody can like have their own interpretation of it, but I think it does speak very like loudly at the housing crisis, of the issues that arise from that, and then especially after COVID.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, we've seen that because people have picked up on it on Twitter and kind of haven't necessarily known about its link to the Graft project, but have really been, wow, what's going on here? And, that's picked up in another conversation that's happening in Cork City around Derelict Ireland. And I think, we'd spoken about kind of Frank O'Connor and the work that he's doing in a kind of activist way. And this kind of, I think, really makes visible something that people are trying to articulate it, and kind of, allows it to be a very public discussion kind of in the community, but for the community. I mean, the interesting thing for me as well is that it is there all the time, but you don't always see it all the time, because obviously during the daytime, or if it's in kind of, bright sunlight, you can there, you might get a sense, but you probably won't look up. But the moment dusk falls, you see people kind of pulling up, kind of going, oh, what's that? And then by the time night falls, and you've got that kind of different kind of, it's popping out at you. Is there a little bit of sadness for me about that, is that the kind of people who are most likely to see it at nighttime could well be the people who are most affected, but not necessarily the people who might be then at that point safe at home in their own home. So I do think we need to work hard to share it as widely as possible to do that. But I think it is potentially very encouraging, actually, for young people to see these issues recognized. And again, there's a gorgeous choreography or closeness to the bodies that recalls a number of other kind of video artists, whether that's, Bill Viola or Tony Usler, or you've referenced Peter Campus, I think yourself. How deliberate is that in your practice, Brid, and kind of how much are you looking kind of and learning still from these other artists? I mean, just to remind everyone that you graduated in 2019. It's just extraordinary that you have this kind of such an accomplished body of work already. But there does seem to be these lovely callbacks to what is now a history of video art.
Yeah, well, to be honest, like you just like listed a few of my favorite artists, like Bill Viola and like Tony Osler and Peter Campus, and like all of their video pieces. It's just their video portraiture, really. Like especially Bill Viola, he often has these very still bodies, but can say a lot. Like there isn't whole lot of choreography in the videos. It's just them being in the space. And then obviously they were all friends. We were like, everybody was very comfortable with each other. So I tried to like not choreograph the bodies too much, but just to let them sit and rest in this space, and just kind of relax, but also like look down on the kind of people who would be in the streets, and just kind of then there's also like they are laid out more like kind of people in the background, like maybe like kind of more like Caravaggio, kind of referencing some kind of history of art. But yeah.
No, and it's interesting to me as well. Like, I mean, there's the kind of even the different clothes, the colors, like that feels very well managed. I mean, as in it is. Do you dress your models? Did you kind of do any kind of direction in that way to ensure that it came together in the way that you wanted? Or
that was a funny one. So like I had a few directions. It was basically like, please don't wear black, which was hard. Even I jumped in one of the videos and I had to go back and try to find clothes that weren't black. But so I think it's funny that the colors do like match so much, and even in the different groups of people, you can kind of see like even the one on the bottom right here, like the colors are matching, but it's just because these people are friends and they live together. They kind of like mirror each other a little bit, which I thought was really interesting. But no, I tried to like my only kind of instructions were to come like just dressed as yourself. I didn't want to take away, I wanted people's personalities to come through. I wanted everybody to just act as themselves. But then obviously there was kind of issues with like color and projection mapping, so not too dark clothes. But yeah, no, I wanted it to come across as like reality. I didn't want it to be too contrived with their clothing.
but it's that hard thing of having to manage it so that it feels natural rather than.
Yeah.
And there are also some lovely moments when you're kind of walking past the work on Oliver Plunkett Street, and you really feel like they're kind of some of the people are kind of almost trying to catch your eye or something. I mean, like you're definitely, as if you were being asked to not just again, it's that thing of not looking just from the outside, but being implicated into a conversation. And that's kind of something that recurs. You can see it again and again in your work. So was that, like, again, a direction that you gave them, or were you kind of just looking to catch and edit in those moments?
No, it was definitely a direction. Like, obviously with each group, like I had a conversation with everybody about like where it would be situated. So I would let them know that, okay, this is going to be in the second story window, and they all kind of, they knew, like, everybody in the videos is affected in some way by the housing crisis at the minute as well. So they were very, like, they were all personal themes to everybody. So, like, there was a little bit of direction to maybe look down at the street and look down at the people, but then also I didn't want that to be extremely contrived as well either. So they're 10-minute loops, so people would kind of generally like look down, but it's obviously different with them like standing in front of like a camera videoing them and then looking down at the street. But I think everybody kind of really understood the brief from the outset, as they all kind of like were very felt very strongly about the concept as well.
And I suppose it's interesting to me too, in that context of just that idea of panels and the shape that you're using, and going back to kind of you certainly seem to have a kind of a preference for that kind of confined, again, almost like a painting space, the kind of idea of the predella panel I think I mentioned in terms of kind of Renaissance work. But here you have, again, I know they're windows, and that's one of the powerful kind of pieces of engagement, but it does fit so nicely with this formal sense of engagement that you quite like that long kind of rectangle as something to deliver your work.
Yeah, no, it really, I think it comes true in a lot of my work, but I feel like I also, sometimes I love to get away from the like 16:9 kind of like the video screen, but then kind of use architecture to like create the borders themselves. Even with like the After Francesca piece, like the alcove was the border. So again, here the windows are the border. I think a lot of that has to do with like the architecture that I'm kind of like working with. And then obviously the LED screens for the blue piece in the National Gallery, that was very intentional, just because of how triptychs are normally displayed in these kind of like long kind of rectangular pieces. But yeah, I do try to make get away from the normal kind of square screens, but I think even turning them on their side, so it's not just like the 16:9, even like just flipping them and kind of changes how they're viewed. They're not viewed so much as like a movie, but they're just more kind of realistic in the space.
Yeah, no, it's really wonderful. And I'll just remind anyone, if anyone has any questions or wants to raise anything with Brid, do either pop it in the chat or put it into the Q&A. We've got about another kind of 5 minutes or so, Brid. And thank you just for sharing that, because I think when you see the install piece there, you can just see how vivid it makes such a serious issue. I've got a kind of just a question. I've got a couple more questions for you, but just in terms of just closing out on this work, and I think that sometimes art can obviously help to focus, and in this case literally bring light to a very, very serious issue. But to what extent do you feel a kind of there is the responsibility or the activism for you is it kind of that you just want to raise these into the public domain, or because you've been fearless, I would say, in terms of how you've taken on some incredibly serious issues, and you've done it with such a kind of deft understanding, but not kind of a huge propaganda way of moving the work. There's always a kind of a gentleness, and I would have felt an invitation to the audience into a conversation rather than a sense of, you know, demand or a kind of push. And while that's hugely important, that sense of protest and engagement that we've seen indeed from our own student community in the university, I think in order to kind of move forward issues, people have to be in the same room. They have to be kind of starting to share and talk about the issues together. And whether that is around transgender issues, or whether it was about Repeal the Eighth, or here with the housing crisis, so much of it is about trying to create a space for conversation. And I think your art really does that. How do you feel about that kind of link to activism?
Yeah, so like I think it's really important for me to like kind of create a space for conversation, especially with this piece. There's so many people shouting and screaming on social media and looking for change. I just want to add to that, but open a kind of dialogue, and maybe just people who wouldn't necessarily engage with this kind of conversation to kind of like, everybody walks down Arbor Plunkett Street. So just kind of like open conversations for people who might not necessarily talk about it. But then like, I'm not an economist, and I don't claim to have answers for any of these issues. I just believe that discussions need to be had about them, and we need kind of government action. So I don't have my own set of demands, as I'm not an economist, but I would really like these conversations to start happening just more widely.
Well, and certainly they happen, I think, in a very human way through your work, and that's so important. We do have a question that's come in from Dennis Linehan. Hi, Dennis. Dennis is asking, Brid, were you conscious of doing something different or contesting to the kind of stock photography used by property developers and indeed some architects in the marketing of their buildings?
No, I actually, to be honest, I hadn't actually thought about that. But I can see that as buildings are like being made, or like vacant buildings, they usually put up stickers or to let you know what's going in. So maybe it's kind of like, okay, here's people going in here, here's the apartments, here's the living spaces. That's kind of like an interesting idea, but I hadn't actually thought of that before.
No, and it is interesting because, you know, that almost, that kind of stock photography that Dennis is talking about really is almost like a kind of a whole kind of marketing kind of strange alternate universe in itself, where you see people with amazing kitchens, or kind of these buildings that have been kind of so utterly transformed but don't conform to the reality of them. Whereas, as I kind of we were speaking about, in a way, there's always this kind of very fragile, real quality to your work. But I think that's the chink where we all get to feel we can relate to it. It isn't almost something to aspire to, but it's neither is it something to kind of say, no, that's not us. I think, like going back to say the work that you did with Darren, it's all too easy to say about the traveler community or the LGBT community, if you're straight, that's not us. But actually, he's speaking to us as a person and as an individual, and with a mouth that we all have. And it just kind of feels like you're creating these connections really are around kind of some of the commonalities of our shared humanity. Does that?
Yeah, no, definitely that.
And indeed, Dennis is offering, and we'd really appreciate that, saying that Gillian Rose has written a piece on this, which he will send to us. And he really likes the real figures in your work, which is great to hear, because again, so it is that kind of funny thing, I would say, of they're real figures, and yet still, as you mentioned, I think in relation to this, that kind of sense of Caravaggio, those strong art historical references still coming in. So it's almost as if you're kind of operating art history to push back against some of the kind of stronger photographic or marketing or propaganda narratives that tend to shape identities at the moment. And you know, that's, I think, I mean, obviously it's an incredibly intelligent way of working, but it's also very demanding for you, Brid, as an artist. I mean, I imagine you're kind of constantly having to research and think through these kind of ideas.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, and even like they're kind of real people, but also like they're life size, but then they're kind of like ghosts of what could possibly be kind of like haunting the building, like these ghosts of people that should be there, or yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. And we have another question coming into us from Anna Viola. She's saying she's interested in the choice of video as opposed to still photography. Is it a matter of realism, or does it have to do as well with the sense of time unfolding, repetition in relation to living in confined space?
Yeah, I think it's I think if they were just still photography, it would be less kind of human. Um like even like though there's very little movement in the video pieces, you have a sense that people are there and there's time going by. It's people they nearly look bored, and like they're waiting for waiting for like something to come of this. But yeah, I don't think uh still images for me capture the same kind of like lived experience, or that these people are like alive.
Yeah, well, no, and thank you, Anna Viola, for such a great question. I realize we're almost coming to the end of our time. I'm going to ask you that terrible question, maybe that no artist will ever wants to ask you, but what is next, or what are you imagining or planning now as Graft comes to an end, Brid, and hopefully as we see kind of an opening up of the galleries and spaces where you might kind of show work again? What are you thinking about?
To be honest, I'm thinking of like continuing on with like these kind of interrupting these spaces and architecture to kind of shine light on kind of like current issues. Even in the past like few weeks, there's the ideas of like closing down these cultural spaces. I'm just thinking of myself, like in Dublin, like I'm right beside the cobblestone here, which they have crazy plans to basically destroy this kind of cultural space, and then the kind of hotels popping up in like Merchants Arch. So I think it will continue on with this the ideas of these public spaces and what they could be used for. Yeah, so hopefully some more kind of site specific installations in the future to come.
Well, we really look forward to it. I'm excited to even think about what you might do. It was interesting, actually. I think earlier in the week on Twitter, the National Gallery of Ireland were sharing some historic images that artists had sketched of merchants' art, almost as a way of saying, can you not recognize how important this vista and this space is? And so maybe we need Brid Murphy now to pick up that baton, as you have so brilliantly done with this incredible body of work that you have shared with us today. And it has been fantastic to have you as part of Graft, Brid, and thank you for everything you've done to be part of the project. Graft continues around Cork until the end of October. It is, as I said, a partnership between the Glucksman and the National Sculpture Factory that has been funded by the Arts Council of Ireland, and we're very, very grateful for that support, as well as to support that was given to us by Cork City Council and University College Cork in terms of realising the works, and to specifically in the context of Brid's work, you mentioned the Here's Health people. So hopefully this building at least is going to have a renewed sense of presence and life on Oliver Plunkett Street. So even when we take down your works, we can hopefully feel that there will be a sense to give over to kind of actual bodies being in that spaces in not such cramped ways. Just to say here, I've got it just saying, like, thank you so much from Anna Viola. She loved the installation and she's doing a research project and would love to talk to you more about your work. I can only imagine that that's going to be more and more the case, Brid, and just genuinely a heartfelt thanks from all of us for just the thoughtful provocation that you have created in our city as part of Graft. And
but thank you very much, Fiona, and like thank you to the Glucksman and the NSF as well. Like thank you for all your help and like letting this come.
Yeah, it's been a great partnership. And I should say that we have got another 2 artist talks coming up. So next week, Linda Quinlan will be in conversation. So please do go to the website graphcork.com or to theglucksman.org to sign up for the event right there and join in. And Vanessa Lopez will be in 2 weeks' time. And you still have kind of 2.5 weeks to get out and see this work. If you haven't, I really recommend trying to plan a nighttime walk down Oliver Plunkett Street so that you can see it kind of, actually I suppose as the nights are getting earlier, but now from about after 8 p.m. those upper windows in Liam Rochelles look absolutely amazing. And just to say thank you so much, Brid, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.